Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast with Mike and Mike. Sales is a thinking process. This podcast will help you learn about what works in sales, how to hone your skills, and increase your success. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and I'm here with Mike Simmons, co-founder of Catalyst Sale. Mike, I have a interesting topic this week. I've heard the phrase in selling that you should stop selling after yes. Now, you're the sales professional. So what do they mean when they say that?
Well, I think the best movie the movie that nails this is Moneyball, where they're in that scene with, it's Brad Pitt and Jonah, and they're talking to the GM of an organization, and the GM says yes to the trade and was about ready to say something else. And Billy Bean, so Brad Pitt's character, hangs up the phone, and Jonah looks at him like, what just happened? Can't believe that he just hung up on somebody. And I think the follow-up there was, nothing good can happen after that yes, or and from my perspective, when I think of this, I think of the idea of how after that verbal yes or that commitment, but you can, even with the best intentions, add additional clarity, and that additional clarity turns into something that triggers another question, and that trigger that turns into another question turns into a need for additional confirmation. That need for additional confirmation maybe brings another person into the discussion, and you get into a situation where now there's some confusion. That little bit of confusion opens up inside the customer's eyes, and now the deal either gets delayed or it stalls or it needs to start over. So if you've gotten to the point where the customer has said yes, where you've connected all of those dots, you've served them in the right way, then the best next step is to say thank you for the business, establish those next steps, and continue to execute, as opposed to bringing new information into the deal.
Why is it risky to bring new information in? What can happen?
Well, just it could raise questions that didn't come up in the buyer's mind throughout the process. And ideally, when you've gone through your process, you've identified the who, the what, the why, the where, the when, and the how. Like, what are they trying to do? Why is that important? How have they tried to do it beforehand? How will they execute on it going forward? You've established fit, meaning you're able to solve this problem that they've got with your solution. You've established feasibility, meaning they're able to execute based on what you're delivering. And when you start to bring in new ideas, it could raise an objection that didn't come up previously. And ultimately, what that can turn into is concern around whether or not this is the right solution for them. And you could find out that now others inside the organization need to be involved in the decision process. And now it delays your sales cycle and pushes things out, and maybe even opens up risk that can be addressed by a competitor.
Interesting. Now, that just makes me wonder, how do you handle it? You've got the verbal yes. Not everything is signed around. You're waiting on that part. But what interaction do you usually have with a customer after that?
Yeah. So once I've gotten the verbal yes from a customer, then I reiterate the next steps that we've established beforehand. So the next step might be, okay, maybe that procurement is getting involved. And there are a lot of people in complex sales who are saying, well, hey, if procurement now is just getting involved, you've not closed the deal, you're not selling after yes, this isn't a viable or a realistic scenario. And I could say, yep, you're right. In that scenario where you've gotten the verbal from the decision maker and that procurement is part of it, you've got a lot of extra work, and there are multiple areas where a deal could slow down. But let's say that you're working with the decision maker, that procurement's not necessarily involved, and the next step is to send over your agreement, and that agreement is a standard order form that doesn't have a lot of complexity around terms and conditions. Then what I would do is I would say, thank you for the business. We look forward to a successful implementation. I will follow this up with an email with our order form that will explain each of the components of the product that you're purchasing. Once that is executed on your side, then we'll move forward with the implementation. and the implementation will consist of X, Y, and Z. And X, Y, and Z might be that the customer is providing a user list. We're setting up a marketing meeting to discuss the implementation. And then the third piece might be that we're launching to employees on site inside their organization. So throughout your process, you should consistently be establishing next steps and setting expectations. One of the principles we've talked about in the past is setting expectations and executing flawlessly. You set expectations here based on next steps after general agreement of the deal, and then you start executing against those.
Just to make this conversation a little more real, are you comfortable sharing some examples of mistakes you've seen people make during this after they've already got a verbal agreement?
Yeah, we've seen instances where people have made mistakes, not only after the verbal, but after the contract's been signed.
Oh, no.
So we had a scenario a couple of years ago where we had a contract that was signed, and the person who was involved there were multiple people involved in the decision process. So we're talking about a significant enterprise deal where you have multiple stakeholders. And in this instance, we had a stakeholder we had somebody who was responsible for the implementation that was separated, that was not directly part of the purchasing decision or the engagement that we had with the team as the deal was moving forward. And then in the context of an initial implementation call, a question came up about licensing. In the clarification around licensing, that raised a red flag for that individual, and the individual took advantage of some language that allowed them to exit the agreement. And it had a significant impact on the number for the year, significant impact on the team for the year. And all of this really probably could have been handled a little bit better in the types of conversations that were happening with that individual and their awareness of the deal that was agreed upon and the multiple moving parts that occurred inside the way that deal was designed. The problem I would highlight in this is we had a person who was ultimately responsible for implementation. So this is where you get into feasibility. Are they actually going to be able to implement? Who was not part of the discussion process early on. And we did not generate buy-in with that individual's team, even though they were ultimately responsible for the success of the program going forward.
And I think those stories are what help connect to this, because otherwise we're just talking about it, saying avoid this. But man, that you hear things like that, you can really relate to why this is important.
Well, and anybody can Monday morning quarterback. Like, it's easy for us to talk about something like that now because, well, heck, Jody, you were never impacted by the number, and it was years ago that I was impacted by the number. But the lessons learned from that are, make sure you ask the important questions throughout your sales process to identify fit and feasibility. And I know we're talking about the catalyst sale process, this fit and feasibility piece, but fit is that internal test. Do we have a solution for the customer? That are we going to be able to solve the problem with an existing product that we have inside our offering? Or will we have to make some customizations to that product to meet the customer's need? And that's an internal step. And then on the feasibility side, it's if we're able to do all of these things, is the customer going to be able to execute, not just sign the deal, but are they actually going to be able to implement this program inside their organization, get fair value out of the thing that they're launching so that they will continue to be a customer over the long term? And there we're starting to talk about recurring revenue scenarios and some SaaS-based products, but it still applies in that idea of if I sell something to the customer and I've identified fit, but it's not feasible for them to implement, does it reflect poorly on my business if I take their money and they're not going to be successful with it? And I think it does. It reflects poorly on your business, and it will not lead to referrals, and it could lead to some other damage inside the marketplace. So getting this back into context, had we talked with the client about what the implementation process looked like on their end and who is involved, and asked some of those questions on about how will they be engaged and what's their awareness of what we're doing, and we got them involved in the process, we would have been able to avoid this thing that happened after the deal was closed and ultimately the loss of what ended up being a 7-figure deal on our side over the term of the contract. So, yeah, Jody, did I hit on it enough to understand the context of where that can significantly impact if you're not working with the right people?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Now, as we begin to take all this that we've talked about and wind the episode down, what advice do you have for us, especially newer salespeople, where it might be tempting to, okay, they said yes, but I just want to make sure everything's fine and, send them more information and just keep in contact. Those are, I think in that situation, we might be more prone to continue to sell after the yes. So just give us some of your final thoughts and what to look for and how to handle it.
Yeah. Final thoughts here. I think the things that are important, make sure that you completely understand the challenges your customer is running into or challenges they are running into and how your solution will address those challenges. That you understand how they are going to implement your solution and that they've got the capability to implement the solution and highlight risk for them and where organizations that you've worked with historically, where they might have failed on an implementation. What you're doing by highlighting that risk is you're improving your credibility with the customer and demonstrating that you're more focused on their success than a one-time deal. And always work from the perspective that these relationships will impact you and will impact your business and will impact the people that you're working with for the long term. And that although you may uncover something early in the process that indicates that fit is not right and feasibility is not right, and it make a deal go south before the business is closed, it's better to have that happen than to get yourself into a situation where you're not able to meet a customer expectation and you ruin a relationship for life. And this has gotten us a bit further away from the whole idea of selling after yes. But getting back to that piece, when we talk about the selling after yes component, once you've addressed all of those items, just get back to your basic process, clearly state what those next steps are, or get validation from the customer that those next steps make sense, and then work toward your plan on executing. And then to hit on your question about early career person and even a later career person who might want to rush through the process, if you're rushing through the process for your own personal gain and you're not rushing through the process for the benefit of your customer, then you're starting from a foundation that's not built in trust. And if you're starting from a foundation that's not built in trust, you're not playing the long game. You're working towards short-term results and you're increasing the amount of risk that you're taking on and that your organization is taking on.
All right. This has been a good one to look at, Mike. If you have anything like this that you might have been struggling with, we've talked about it in an episode that don't be afraid to ask the small questions. Even though you feel like this is something other people should know, I don't want to ask. That's why we do episodes like this. And if you have something you're struggling with, reach out to us at Catalyst Sale, hello@catalystsale.com, or just go to catalystsale.com and find the different ways to contact us, because either Mike and Mike can talk to you directly, or we can do a podcast episode about it and help a lot of people with the same problem.
And Jody, one thing to add to that, if you're finding value in the content that we're putting out there, provide a rating and a review on the podcast. That helps. Share this with others. And if you do have those questions, we can anonymize them. And the one thing that I've not seen yet is I've not been surprised by a question. There's not been a scenario that someone has brought up where we've said, you know what, we've never come across that. So I would love it if the audience could stump us. And we've got some mindshare here. We've got me, and we've got Mike, and we've got members of the team. And we've got a decent amount of experience here, and we are happy to help where we can.
Well, among other things, Mike, that was a very good use of the word anonymize.
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale Podcast.